Spent the first 2 years at a nuclear missile site where, just to keep us happy, they let us go into Wurzburg and patrol as police officers. Came to Fort Hood, where immediately was put to work doing undercover narcotics type stings because I was new and I was not a face anybody would recognize, and they had a drug problem in the Army at that time, which was very real. So that was my initial police work. Later I went to work for the Texas Department of Corrections. I had been hired to the Houston Police Department, but the Texas Department of Corrections was recruiting heavily, and they made it sound as if it would be great. I'd be in Huntsville, I could go to Sam Houston, get my criminal justice degree, and a whole big spiel about how wonderful it would be, which taught me my first major life lesson I'd like to share with you. Never believe anything a recruiter says to you. Okay? I spent the next 3 years working at the Eastham Unit, Texas Department of Corrections, which in 1986, Newsweek did a cover story about Eastham and called it the toughest prison in America, and talked about how corrupt and utterly out of control it was, and it was. I mean, we went through our entire academy was talking about the period of shame that Texas was just leaving behind, the horrible conditions in the Texas prisons and how it had changed. 3 years later, they had to rewrite the curriculum to talk about the period of criminality that followed the period of shame, because the Texas prisons basically lost control. And I was right at ground zero in the middle of that mayhem, and in 1985, I had a spiritual awakening, an epiphany of sorts, that I didn't want to be a part of the violence, that I didn't want to be a part of a racist system because it was explicitly violent and racist, and that I had had enough. 2 weeks later, I was living in Florida and turned my back, realized that I was not cut out to be in the criminal justice system if that's what the criminal justice system was. Within a couple, I got in courses then I changed my career field to counseling. Was doing coursework to finish. I had 3 years of undergraduate work at that point in criminal justice. Was looking to get a counseling degree, and got a call from some people who learned about me and my background. They wanted me to come to work at an adolescent treatment center for chemical dependency. Weird, but okay, I'll give it a try. And I went there, and I immediately loved it. I knew I was doing what I was meant to do. They didn't tell me until later that they really never intended to keep me. They hired me because they thought they had a bunch of rich kids who got F's on their report cards because they were smoking pot. They wouldn't go to bed on time. And I was supposed to come in there and kick their ass and get them to go to bed, and then they would hire someone else to actually do some counseling. But it worked for me, and I spent 16 years then as a counselor, working primarily in the criminal justice system. I worked with thousands of substance abuse clients, and 90% of the people I worked with were on papers, or on probation, or behind bars. At times I worked in locked facilities. Okay? And so that my take on the drug war comes from the perspective of someone who has some criminal justice background, has worked as a cop, correctional officer, but then primarily worked in treatment. Now, during that period, there were a lot of changes in the treatment field. It went from being a medical model of treating chemical dependency to a criminal model of, in order to get treatment by the late 90s, you either had to have cash in hand, or you had to have committed a crime, or have HIV. Otherwise, there really weren't treatment beds available for you. Okay? So along the way, and part of the reason I want to share this with you, if you're going to be out doing this work, I think it's essential for you to know why is it that this issue is important to you. Beyond the fact that maybe you're a user, okay, marijuana user, but are there deeper issues? What does it mean in terms of your values, the things you stand for? Because that's the much more effective argument, ultimately. If you find yourself in an argument or a discussion with someone that's based around the idea marijuana bad, no marijuana good, you've lost, okay? You have to go to some more core fundamental arguments about the very system, the ideology we live in. So I want to give you a sense of some of the things that changed my core belief system that has me up here today talking about legalizing drugs. Where 20 years ago I was out telling people we need to be, I was promoting the drug war. Okay, quite literally I helped start one of the first drug court programs in the country. So I've locked up a lot of people around drugs. And I'm not proud of that, and part of the work I'm doing today is maybe to, not to undo it. I can't undo what was done. Some of those people legitimately got help. But I realized today that I had no right to intervene in what is basically a victimless crime. And that's my belief today. There were two major events as a drug court counselor that began to, I guess, undo my thinking on the drug war. One was that I had a client who came into drug court. He came into drug court with a felony conviction. And the idea was you do a year of counseling and treatment, and we're going to erase the conviction. Okay? So I had a client who came in, and we had thousands of people in drug court. This was in Broward County, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And he did not belong there at all. He did not fit. He would not have known a marijuana bud from a tomato plant. Not that the difference is profound necessarily, but he would not have, he just was not a drug user. That was real obvious from the get-go. And I had a lot of people over the years who tried to fake it and play it off like they were not drug users and they were ignorant. He was not a drug user. He was there to try to beat the conviction. Okay? Which, all right, there were a lot of people that were trying to beat the conviction. Drug therapy, one of the things I learned is, drug therapy, group therapy, doesn't work real well when you've got a crack addict sitting in the same group therapy session as the crack dealer. Okay? Not a real good idea, not optimal. There's 1,000 things about what they've done with these drug court programs that just don't work. Okay? And if we've got time, I'll get into that later. But anyways, so this guy was in there, not a drug user, just simply trying to beat the conviction, because once you got in the system for Lauderdale, you were guilty. There was just no way around it. You were guilty. That was that. The police were always, the judges were always going to side with whatever the police had on paper. The police had confiscated his brand new pickup truck, and he found out later, he'd been like a 15-year employee of the Broward County School Boards. He lost his job for moral inturpitude just because of the conviction. What came out about 6 months later, and he never wanted to share this, he was a homosexual, very closeted, very Catholic upbringing, bunch of brothers, very macho. He had gone out and picked up a streetwalker off the street for sex. That guy had a rock. They both got busted for it. The streetwalker had 15, 20 convictions. He basically, because the cops pressure him to, he drops a dime and says it's the other guy, it's his rock, okay? So that's what this entire conviction was about. And even though, over time, basically everybody knew it was a rotten bum rap, it just was what it was. And that's just the way the system works.